Lots of people have approached me who are, in good jobs and have been in good jobs for some time and have managed to save, even with the extortionate rents that some people have to pay. And yet, when they put a bid on a house, when they try to purchase a house, they find that the amount they can borrow based on their salary plus the deposit they have saved isn't simply enough, that they're short. And of course, this has caused great frustration. Now, what I want to do today is to outline a couple of government schemes that are designed to help those people. I'm not claiming that all of them will help everybody, but at least I would like people to be fully aware of them. The first and most important scheme, I suppose, is the First Home Scheme. And what the First Home Scheme involves is this: if you can't come up with enough money to fully purchase the house that you wish to purchase, then the state can step in, take a share of the house and pay for that share of the house. It's something you'd have to pay off, in due course, but there'll be no immediate worry about that. But it's designed to help people to close that gap between what they have and what the price of the house is. Give you an example. Suppose you have, say, a couple in two reasonably low-paid jobs, I suppose. Let's assume they have 70,000 a year total income. The most they'll be able to borrow there would be, the maximum they'd be able to borrow from a bank or a mortgage company would be 280,000. That's 4 times salary. Mightn't even get that. In many cases, they only offer 3.5, but let's assume it's 4 times salary. That's 280,000. Let's assume they have 30,000 saved, which, if they're paying rent, as I've said, is not an easy thing to do. 280 and 30 is 310. So let's say that the apartment or the house they want to purchase is 360,000. The question is, if they haven't a rich parents or somebody to give them 50,000, where is the other 50,000 going to come from? And this is where the First Home Scheme comes in. It's a scheme whereby, as I say, the state can take a share in the house in return for helping to pay for it and bringing you up to the full 360,000. In this case, what people are looking for is 50,000, which would be about 14% of the cost, 14% of the total cost of the 360,000 house. Now, what will happen then is that if they qualify for this particular scheme, it means that they will owe. The state will have a 14% equity in their house, in other words, a 14% share in the house, which they will have to buy off in certain circumstances in the future. There's no immediate payment involved, or which would be payable on their debt, or if they were to sell the house, etc. There's, of course, a limit to the amount that you can claim that the state will be expected to put in by way of equity. The limit is 30% of the value of the house. If you're not using, there's another scheme called the Help to Buy scheme, which I'll come to shortly. That helps you to pay the deposit. If you're using that Help to Buy scheme and the First Home Scheme, if you're applying for both schemes, the state can put in up to 20% of the value of the house by way of equity. If you're not using the Help to Buy scheme, in other words, if you have enough money for the deposit and you don't need assistance towards the deposit or whatever, or you're not, for whatever reason you're not claiming the Help to Buy scheme, then you can get up to 30%. In other words, if the house is worth 300,000 and you're only using one scheme, the First Home Scheme, the one I'm dealing with now, you could borrow up to 90,000. You could ask the state to put in up to 90,000. If you're using the First Home Scheme, or if you're using the Help to Buy scheme also, you can only expect the state to put in up to 60,000, which is 20%. Now, normally when you're buying a house or an apartment, as you know, you'll be expected to pay a 10% deposit. But as I've said, there is a scheme called the Help to Buy scheme, which is designed to assist people in making up their deposit. But I will explain that separately. Now, the other limitation here is that it only applies if you purchase certain types of houses or apartments. That's the first. Now it'll have to be a newly built house or an apartment. Now, people have often asked me, if they're building their own house on their own site, does that qualify? And the answer is yes, it does. It's either you purchase a new house or apartment, or you self-build a house. The other thing is that there are two cases. Secondly, you can't have owned a house previously. You cannot have owned a house previously. You must be the first time purchaser of a new house, whether you build it yourself or whether you buy it from an apartment block or from a developer. Now, basically there are two exceptions to the rule that you can't have owned a house before. One exception is if you're a person who's divorced or separated, or if your relationship has ended and you don't have any interest in a house, even though you had an interest previously, you can access that scheme. The second exception is if you're a person who's gone through personal insolvency or bankruptcy, even if you used a house in the past. If you have no interest in a house now, you can still use that scheme. And the other thing to mention is that depending on what part of the country you're in, there is a limit, a price limit, above which you can't. In other words, if the house is above, if the price of the house is above a certain limit, you can't claim the scheme, and that differs for different parts of the country. Here in Limerick, the upper price would be 425,000 for a house, 450,000 for an apartment. So if what you're purchasing is in excess of either of those numbers, depending on whether you're buying a house or an apartment, you're out of luck. You can't access the first home scheme. Now, I mentioned, you will recall, that the state will take a share in the property. So people will ask, of course, when do they have to repay that, or do they have to repay that? Well, first of all, for 5 years, nothing happens. You don't have to do anything for 5 years. After 5 years, there is a small service charge, depending on the value of the house. It doesn't go towards repaying the equity or anything like that. It's just a service charge that kicks in after 5 years. But you have to pay off the equity ultimately, or it has to be paid off by your successors or whatever. Now, the amount of equity you will have to pay off will be based on the value of the house at the time you're paying off the equity. Take, for example, you purchased a house, say now, for 300,000, and the state took a 10% equity. Let's assume in 4 years' time you want to pay off the equity and the house has risen to 360,000. The amount you have to pay will be 36,000. It'll be 10% of the value at the time you're buying it out. Now, if you sell your house, you must live in the house. That's one of the criteria. So if you're selling the house, or if you're moving someplace else and renting out the house, then you have to pay off the equity at that point. If somebody dies, the equity will be payable out in their estate. But if it's a joint application, say husband and wife, it'll only become payable when the last one of the two dies. So an important point to remember is if you switch mortgages, it doesn't affect your entitlement to the scheme, but you must make sure that the mortgage company you're switching to is one of the recognised companies for the purposes of the scheme, like, for example, AIB, Bank of Ireland, EBS, TSB, Haven Finance. There are a number of them, but you can always check that out if and when you're switching. The final thing is that you can apply online and you can fill out a form. The First Home Scheme's headquarters is, and I'll just read this out slowly, at Block C, Maynooth Business Campus, Maynooth, County Kildare. The air code is W22F854 and the phone number is 0818 275 662. But basically what I would advise people who are thinking of accessing the First Home Scheme is to contact an independent mortgage broker for a chat. They'll give you advice, or if you want to look it up yourself, you can Google free First Home Scheme